She dreaded a union with a human, until the soldier transformed everything. The decree came wrapped in gold foil and smelled like burnt ceremonial wax, the kind they used only when the High Council wanted you to know the decision was final. Nyracel broke the seal with 2 fingers and read it in under 4 seconds. Then she read it again, because the first time she was certain her translator implant had glitched. It had not glitched. She was to be bonded to a human soldier by the end of the 3rd moon cycle. The arrangement had been negotiated between the Velkan sovereignty and the Earth Interstellar Command as part of the ceasefire compact. One cultural bond, one symbolic union between species, a gesture of goodwill dressed up in the language of diplomacy. Nyracel set the document on the edge of her desk and walked to the window. Outside, the capital city of Velsaroth stretched in every direction, all silver towers and layered sky bridges and the faint blue haze of atmospheric filtration fields. A city that had stood for 4,000 years. A city her family had helped build, generation by generation, bone by bone. And now the High Council, in its infinite wisdom, had decided that the best thing for that city, for their entire species, was to hand her off to a creature from a muddy little planet that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 40 years ago. She thought the word the way she meant it. Creature. Because if she let herself think of it as anything more complicated than that, she would have to start feeling things she did not have time to feel. Her aide, a small and perpetually nervous young woman named Phaon, appeared in the doorway. "My lady." "The human delegation arrived this morning. They are being housed in the East Wing." "How many?" "A party of 12. The soldier himself, his commanding officer, a diplomatic attaché, and 9 others." "His commanding officer?" Nyracel turned from the window. "They sent a minder." "It appears so." She had expected that. She had read everything the Sovereignty's intelligence network had compiled on humans in the past decade, which was an enormous amount of material, because humans were profoundly difficult to stop watching. They were loud and chaotic, and they had a habit of doing things that should not work, and then acting surprised when they worked. They argued with their own leaders openly, in public, at considerable volume. They ate food that should have killed them and called it cuisine. They had a concept called sarcasm that her translator implant still could not fully parse, because it meant the opposite of what it said, but only sometimes, and the logic of when was apparently a feeling rather than a rule. And they sent soldiers to diplomatic events, not diplomats, soldiers. The file on her desk, the one she had memorized 3 days ago because knowing the thing you dread gives you at least the illusion of control, identified the soldier as Corporal Owen Garrett, age 29, from a place called New Bristol on the western coast of what humans called England. Service record, 6 years in Earth Interstellar Command, 3 combat deployments. Decorated twice. Disciplinary citations, also twice. The citations were for conduct unbecoming, and the details were sealed, which she found far more alarming than if they had been listed plainly. His photograph had been included. She had looked at it for approximately 2 seconds before closing the file. The image told her nothing useful. Humans all looked approximately the same to her. Soft, without bioluminescence, no secondary eyelids, no joint plating, fragile in the way that insects were fragile, small enough to break if you were not careful. She had been careful never to get close enough to any of them to find out if that was true. "Tell the diplomatic staff to arrange a meeting," she said. "Formal reception. Tomorrow morning I will meet him with a full court present." Phaon hesitated. Nyracel knew that hesitation. It meant Phaon had information she had not yet decided was worth the consequences of delivering. "Say it." "His commanding officer has requested that the first meeting be informal, a private introduction. He said the soldier would be more, his word was himself, in an informal setting, less likely to say the wrong thing." The last sentence said everything the commanding officer had not said. The soldier said wrong things, often enough that a superior officer felt the need to preemptively apologize for it. She breathed in through her nose, held it. "Fine," she said. "Informal. Tomorrow. My private study." She would give him 30 minutes. She would be polite. She would be exactly as warm as the compact required, and not 1 degree warmer. And then she would begin the very long, very careful process of finding a legal mechanism to dissolve this arrangement before the 3rd moon cycle arrived. She had already had her legal counsel working on it for 6 days. They had not found anything yet, but they would. She was certain of that, the way she was certain of very few things, with her whole body, all the way down to her joint plating. She just needed them to be faster. She was in her private study at precisely the arranged hour. She had chosen the study deliberately. It was smaller than the council chamber, less intimidating than the throne room, but it was still entirely her space, still surrounded by 4,000 years of Velcon history, in the form of artifacts and texts and ceremonial objects that a human would not understand and could not read. The room would tell him who he was dealing with before she said a word. Owen Garrett arrived 4 minutes late. She noted it, filed it. He came in ahead of the 2 guards she had posted outside, which meant he had simply walked through them as though they were furniture. Not aggressively. So he did not push past them, he just walked through, with a calm that suggested it had genuinely not occurred to him that they might be there to stop him. He was taller than the photograph had suggested. Not remarkably, not by Velcon standards, where she stood at a full hand taller than most humans, but tall enough to notice. He wore his uniform, which was a dark gray with red detailing at the collar and cuffs, and it was pressed, which suggested someone else had pressed it, because he moved like a person who was entirely unconcerned with whether his clothing was pressed. His hair was dark and cut close at the sides. His eyes, and this was the thing she had not been able to predict from the photograph, were a color she did not have a precise word for in Velcon, something between gray and blue, the color of the sky over the Eastern Ocean just before a storm arrived. He looked at her the way very few people looked at her, not with fear, not with formal deference, with attention, the specific and focused attention of someone who was trying to understand something, not perform understanding of it. It lasted 2 seconds. Then he said, "I'm late. I'm sorry. I got turned around twice in this building, and then I found your archives corridor, and I stopped. Your archivists did not stop me, which was either very trusting or very alarming, and I genuinely cannot tell which." His voice was lower than she expected. The accent, and she had studied human regional accents as part of her preparation, was British, but worn down at the edges, smoothed by years of living and serving alongside people from everywhere. She said, "The archives are open to credentialed guests." "I don't have a credential for the archives." "No," she agreed. "You do not." He looked at her for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something drier than a smile. Something that said he had clocked the implication and was choosing not to be offended by it. She had expected him to be defensive. She had prepared for defensive. He pulled out the chair across from her desk and sat down, did not wait to be invited. "I read the compact," he said, "all 14 pages of it, and then I read the annexures, because I've learned that what you need to know is always in the annexures, and I want to tell you up front that I didn't volunteer for this." She looked at him steadily. "Neither did I." "I know." He rested his forearms on the desk. He had a small scar on the left side of his jaw, pale against the rest of his skin, shaped like a narrow crescent. She noticed it the way she noticed all physical details, automatically, filed under data. "My CO volunteered me. He said I was the right fit because I'm adaptable." Is that what the disciplinary citations were for? Adaptability. The pause that followed was exactly 1 beat too long to be casual. You've seen those. Intelligence briefings are thorough. He did not ask what they said. She thought that was interesting. He clearly wanted to, and did not. Instead he said, "One of them was for disobeying an order that would have gotten 14 people killed. The order was wrong. I said so, and then I didn't follow it. The review board agreed the order was wrong, but they still cited me for the disobedience, because apparently the process matters more than the outcome. And the second? I told a general that his tactical assessment was based on incomplete data, in front of his staff, at considerable volume. "Were you right?" "Yes." She had not expected that specific combination. The honesty, the absence of either apology or ego about it. He was not boasting. He was just stating what had happened, the way a person stated facts about weather. She looked at him for a long moment. "The bond ceremony is in 62 days, she said. "My legal team is working to identify grounds for dissolution of the arrangement." "Mine too," he said. "We could share notes." She did not know what to do with that. He said it without malice, without humor, without bitterness, simply as an offer, a logistical suggestion from someone who, like her, was stuck in a situation he had not designed and was attempting to navigate it with the most practical tools available. She said, slowly, "That would be unprecedented. Most things worth doing are." He stood, because the 30 minutes were up. She had not said so, but he had looked at the clock on the wall twice, and apparently he could count. "I'll be here another 62 days at minimum. I'd rather we spent them doing something useful than sitting in our separate corners." He paused at the door. "The archivists, by the way, they did know I didn't have a credential. They let me in anyway. You might want to know that." He left. She sat in the silence he left behind, and for a long moment she stared at the door, and she thought about the fact that he had looked at her with the kind of attention that expected her to be worth understanding. She was not sure she liked it. She was sure, for the first time in 6 days, that she wanted to know what he had read in her archives corridor, what he had stopped for. She picked up the file on her desk and opened it to his photograph again. She closed it again almost immediately, but not after 2 seconds. After 7. The archives question bothered her for 3 days. It was not a large thing. It was a door left open a crack, and Naira Sell had spent her entire adult life learning to walk past open doors without looking through them, because she was a public figure, and public figures did not have the luxury of being caught curious. But the question sat at the back of her mind like a stone in a shoe, present at odd moments, most inconvenient when she was trying to think about something else entirely. On the morning of the 4th day, she called for Fane. Find out what texts the human soldier accessed in the archives corridor. Fane's stylus paused over her notepad. The corridor is not catalogued for guest access. I know. Find out anyway. Fane found out by the afternoon. She delivered the list with the expression of someone handing over information they were not sure was safe to touch. Naira Sell read the list. Owen Garrett had spent 20 minutes in the archives corridor. In that time he had pulled 4 texts from the accessible display cases, the kind that were behind glass but had readable front pages visible through the transparency. He could not have read them in full. He had read what was visible. The 4 texts were a military strategy compendium from the Second Sovereignty era, a grief chronicle written by a Velcon general who had lost an entire battalion in the Jeth Wars, a philosophical treatise on the concept of duty, and a handwritten letter from the sovereignty's first architect that was displayed in full on the inside cover because it had been lost for 2,000 years and only recently recovered. She sat with that list for a long time. He had not looked at the decorative pieces. He had not looked at the ceremonial weapons or the jeweled relics, or the things humans typically called beautiful when they visited Velcon institutions. He had looked at words. He had looked at what people had written when they were trying to understand something that hurt. She did not know what to do with that, so she did what she always did when she did not know what to do with something. She worked. The morning briefings were dense. 3 territorial disputes on the outer rim that the High Council wanted her opinion on, a trade renegotiation with the Jeth Confederation that had stalled for the 4th time, and a new intelligence report on the Veth Coalition's eastern movements that made everyone in the room very still and very careful with their words. Owen Garrett was not in any of these meetings. He had been assigned by his own CO's arrangement to sit in on the Defensive Council sessions, not to advise, just to observe, as part of the cultural integration requirements of the compact. He attended all 3 of that week's sessions. He sat in the observer gallery above the council floor. He did not speak. He took notes. She noticed this because she noticed everything in her council chamber and because his note-taking was unusual. He used a physical notebook, a small, worn paper one with a cover that had been repaired with what looked like, she had to look twice to be certain, military-grade adhesive tape. He wrote continuously, in tight, small lines, and he never looked at the notebook while he wrote. He kept his eyes on the council floor. After the second session, she had her security chief pull the content of the notes. The security chief returned with the notebook's photographed pages and a faintly uncomfortable expression. He permitted the inspection freely, my lady. He said, and I quote, that he had nothing to hide and that if you wanted to read them, you should just ask him directly, because his handwriting was difficult. She looked at the photographs. His notes were an analysis, not of the proceedings, of the council members themselves, who deferred to whom and in what sequence, which advisors spoke before they were addressed versus waiting to be called upon, where the power sat in the room versus where the formal authority sat, and the gap between those two things. He had mapped the entire informal power structure of her defensive counsel in 45 minutes of observation, in small, neat handwriting that was, indeed, difficult. In the margin of the third page, he had written a single question: why does the military advisor in the blue sash look at the eastern window every time the Veth report comes up? She looked at that question for a very long time. She had noticed the same thing. 6 months ago, she had noted it and set it aside because there was not enough evidence to act on, and she could not afford to create a political incident over a window glance. She had told no one, because the moment you told someone that you suspected a council member, the information became dangerous, regardless of whether you were right. He had been in her council chamber for 2 sessions. She sent for him that evening. Not formally, she had Fayen leave word at his quarters that she would walk the south courtyard at sundown if he wished to join her. It was a gesture that allowed him to decline without obligation. She expected he would not know enough about Velkon's social signals to recognize that. He arrived at the south courtyard at exactly sundown. You could have just asked, he said. He was looking at the sky, which at sundown over Velsereth turned a specific shade of amber-violet that still surprised her sometimes, even after a lifetime of seeing it. Asked what? To read my notes. Your security chief was very polite about it, but the notebook smelled like someone had photographed it. She turned to look at him. It smelled like PhotoFix solution. They use it for preservation imaging. I've been around enough document work to know the smell. He glanced at her. Not challenging, just even. I don't mind. I wrote them so someone would read them. You wrote them knowing they would be inspected. I wrote them hoping they would be. If they're useful to you, I wanted you to have them. She turned back to the sky. Something in the simplicity of that statement was more unsettling than anything complicated he could have said. She said, the advisor in the blue sash. You noted his behavior. Third eastern window, Owen said. Every time your intelligence officer mentions the Jeth corridor specifically, not the Veth movements generally, he checks the window. It's a habit. Habits like that are usually about distance. He's measuring something. Whether there's time, whether there's space. I don't know, but he's measuring. She did not say, I have thought the same thing for 6 months. Instead, she said, he has served on the Defensive Council for 11 years. He was appointed by the previous High Arbiter. Tenure doesn't clean the window habit. She looked at him. He was watching the courtyard, not her. The amber light caught the scar on his jaw. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, not at attention, not deliberately casual, just present, like someone who had learned that standing ready and standing relaxed were actually the same posture if you did them long enough. She said, why did you stop in the archives corridor? He was quiet for a moment. She had the impression he had been waiting for this question since the first meeting. The letter, he said, from the first architect, the one that was lost for 2,000 years. He paused. I've read a lot of military history, human history, and the thing that always gets me, the thing that hits me, is not the victories. It's what people wrote before they knew how things would turn out. That letter was written by someone who had just finished building the foundations of this city and genuinely did not know if the thing she'd built would last another generation, let alone 4,000 years. And she was trying anyway, because, I'm paraphrasing, my Velcon script is terrible, because the alternative to building something uncertain was not building anything at all. He looked at her then. I thought it was relevant, he said. She did not ask relevant to what. She did not need to. They stood in the courtyard until the amber was fully gone and the sky had settled into the deep blue of full night. They did not speak again for a long time, and when they did, it was about the trade renegotiation with the Jeth Confederation, which she had been stuck on for 3 weeks, and he asked 2 questions in a row that reframed the entire problem in a way that made her stop mid-sentence and stare at him. He shrugged. I did a lot of negotiation training, pre-mission, cross-cultural. It's basically the same structure as a ceasefire if you squint. She went back to her chambers and sat at her desk and did not immediately open the legal dissolution file the way she normally did at the end of each day. She sat for a while first, and she thought about a woman 2,000 years ago, pouring foundations into ground she did not know would hold, and deciding to do it anyway. She did not reach a conclusion that night. She was not the kind of person who rushed to conclusions, but she reached something smaller, a question she had not previously allowed herself to ask. What if the thing she was afraid of was not him specifically? What if it was the thing he represented, the uncertainty of it, the unmapped territory, the fact that she could not read him the way she read everyone else, could not predict him, could not catalog him and file him somewhere that did not require her full attention? She was very good at full attention when she chose to give it. The question of whether she was choosing not to give it here, and why, was one she would sit with for the next several days. She opened the dissolution file. She read 2 pages. She closed it. She opened it again and read 2 more. She closed it again. She went to sleep, which did not come quickly. In the morning, she called Fane and asked her to arrange access for Corporal Owen Garrett to the next 3 Defensive Council sessions, not in the Observer Gallery. At the table, as a non-voting analytical resource. Fane's stylus stopped again. That will require an amendment to the Compact's cultural integration schedule, she said. Then amend it. The High Council will want a reason. Tell them the arrangement is progressing. She picked up her morning briefing folder. Tell them that truthfully. Fayen left. The morning briefing folder was full of territory disputes and trade numbers and intelligence reports that needed her careful, complete attention. She gave it all of that. But somewhere underneath the work, in the part of her mind where questions lived when they were not yet ready to become conclusions, the open door was still there. She did not walk past it. She left it open. On the 31st day, the Jeth Confederation moved. Not diplomatically, not through a trade disruption or a protest filed at the Sovereignty Embassy. They moved a fleet, 12 warships, which was not a battle fleet but was too large for an escort and too organized for a patrol, into the corridor of open space that sat between the outer Velcon colonies and the Jeth border. The corridor was technically neutral territory under the old separation agreements. Technically was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and everyone in the council chamber knew it. Naira Cell's council had been in emergency session for 4 hours when she looked across the table and said, to no one in particular, "Where is Garrett?" He had been at the table for 6 sessions now. She had grown accustomed. This was the precise, careful word she used internally, to having his analytical read available when the information in front of her was incomplete or politically complicated, which it always was. Fane said he requested access to the Signals Intelligence Wing 2 hours ago. I approved it under his new clearance. She looked at Fane. On whose authority? His own, my lady. He said he had a specific read he wanted to verify before presenting it to the council, and that he would rather be wrong privately than wrong publicly. She processed that for a moment. Then she looked back at the table and said, "We will take a short recess." She went to the Signals Intelligence Wing herself. He was standing at a large display screen with 3 of her intelligence analysts, and they were all speaking at once, and none of them were speaking the same language, and the translator drones were working hard. She stood in the doorway for a moment, without being noticed. He was pointing at the fleet formation on the display. "No," he said, in the patient tone of someone who had explained this several times already. "Look at the trailing ships, the two on the far right of the formation. Their positioning doesn't match an entry formation. They're covering a retreat corridor." "Why would you enter a corridor while covering a retreat?" one of her analysts said. "Because you're not entering. You're making someone think you're entering. The 12 ships are a demonstration. The actual event is somewhere else." He found her eyes across the room. He did not look startled to see her. He looked like a man who had been hoping she would come. "The trade renegotiation," he said, "the one that stalled 4 times. The Jeth delegation asked for an adjournment on each occasion right before the session where your team was going to introduce the energy exchange clause." She came into the room. "Yes. They don't want the energy exchange clause on the table. And they don't want to say so directly, because saying it directly gives you leverage over why. So they stall, they adjourn, they create a distraction." He gestured at the fleet display. 12 warships. Every analyst you have is looking at those 12 warships right now. The trade session adjournment request came in 40 minutes ago. Did you see it? She had not. She had not because she had been in an emergency council session about 12 warships. She pulled the trade communication up on the room's secondary display. The adjournment request was there, time-stamped 43 minutes ago. Standard language. Technical difficulties with the delegation's travel schedule. She looked at the display for exactly long enough to confirm the pattern. Then she said to her chief intelligence analyst, "Get me the full signal log from the Jeth embassy for the last 72 hours. "My lady, that requires a level 4 warrant. Then get me one." She looked at Owen. He was not looking at her with satisfaction, which was the look she had expected, and prepared a response to. He was looking at the display with the focused, almost tired expression of someone who had been right about a bad thing and wished he had been wrong. She said quietly, "You've been tracking this since the council sessions." "Since session 2, he said. "The window habit, the trade adjournments, the fleet positioning doesn't fit an aggressive posture. The ships are too expensive and too visible. The Jeth military wouldn't risk that kind of diplomatic exposure for a corridor demonstration. Unless the point is that it's a demonstration." He paused. "Someone in your council is coordinating the timing." There it was, said plainly, out loud, in front of 3 of her analysts who would carry the information to every level of her intelligence hierarchy by the end of the day. She could have been angry at him for that. She had a right to be. It was a judgment call she should have made, whether to surface the suspicion, when, to whom. He had taken that choice away from her. She looked at the analysts. "This room is sealed for the next 2 hours. Nothing leaves this space without my personal authorization." They understood. They were good at their jobs. She looked at Owen. "You should have told me privately," she said. "It came out even, controlled." The anger was there, but so was the recognition that he had been right to move fast, and both things were true simultaneously, and she had learned a long time ago that when 2 true things pulled in opposite directions, you held both of them until you understood why. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I judged that the timing mattered more than the process, and that's your call to make, not mine. I got it wrong." She had expected a great many things from him in the 5 weeks she had known him. She had not expected an apology that was clean of justification. She turned back to the display. "Walk me through the full read, everything you have, in order." He walked her through it. It took 40 minutes. He was methodical, not in the way of someone performing thoroughness, but in the way of someone who had learned that incomplete information was a trap and had the discipline to avoid it. He had dates, timestamps, behavioral patterns, a cross-reference with Jeth trade history going back 8 years that he had pulled from the Open Sovereignty archives. When he finished, she stood very still for a moment. Then she said, "The advisor in the blue sash, trained at the Jeth Institute of Political Science. 12 years ago, before he joined the Sovereignty Council." "I didn't know that," Owen said. "It's not in any file I'd have given you clearance for." "Then it's a connection point, not confirmed." "No," she said. "Not confirmed, But it closes the geometry. She straightened. I need to make 2 calls and pull a warrant, and then I need to return to the council chamber and give nothing away for approximately 4 hours while this processes through the intelligence chain. Can you go back upstairs and say nothing useful until then? He looked at her. I've been saying nothing useful in council sessions my whole career. I'm very good at it. The corner of her mouth moved. It was not a smile, or it was not only a smile. It was the specific involuntary expression of someone who has been surprised into something true. She caught it. She did not stop it. She went to make her calls. The advisor in the blue sash, his name was Ven Roth, and he had served her counsel for 11 years, and she had never had a reason to do anything other than trust him within the reasonable limits of appropriate skepticism, was placed under quiet investigative hold that evening. No announcement, no public procedure, an intelligence review, handled through the closed channels, handled correctly. She sat in her private study at midnight, when the city was quiet, and the filtration fields made the air smell faintly of mineral salts, and she allowed herself to feel the weight of it. 11 years. A man she had worked beside through 2 major diplomatic crises, and a border renegotiation, and the death of the previous high arbiter. A man whose opinion she had solicited, whose judgment she had incorporated into decisions that affected millions of people. She was not prone to guilt. She was prone to precision, to identifying exactly what she had done or not done and assigning it its correct weight. The precision told her she had noticed. She had noticed 6 months ago, and she had not moved on it because the political cost of being wrong outweighed in her calculus the cost of waiting. She had been wrong about that calculus. She wrote that down. She wrote it in the small personal journal she kept in her desk drawer, in Velcon script so old that most people in the sovereignty could not read it fluently. She wrote it plainly, without softening. I waited too long. I prioritized the cost of error over the cost of inaction. 31 days of additional coordination loss. She closed the journal. There was a knock at the door. Fayen did not knock like that. Quick, twice, even. She knew this knock. It was Owen's. Enter. He came in with 2 cups of something. She recognized it as the settlement hall beverage service, the warm grain-based drink that the kitchen staff prepared for late sessions. He set one on the edge of her desk without asking. Thought you might still be up, he said. He did not sit down. He stood near the window, the way she often stood when she was thinking, and did not want to be stationary. She picked up the cup. It was warm. She drank from it, and it tasted unremarkable and comforting in the way of things that had no ambition to be extraordinary. You looked at the window, he said. She looked up. In the council chamber, he explained. When Ven Roth was escorted out for the review, you watched him go, and then you looked at the east window. She was quiet. You noticed him 6 months ago, Owen said. It was not a question. She said, you have no evidence for that. No, he agreed. I don't. But I've watched you in 6 council sessions, and the only time you look at anything other than the person speaking or the display screen is when you're calculating a cost. And when they took him out, the cost calculation was already finished. She set the cup down. She looked at him, actually looked, without the filter of assessment or strategy or the careful management of what she let herself see. He looked back. The city lights through the window caught the storm sky color of his eyes, and he was watching her with that same quality of attention she had noticed on the first day, the kind that expected her to be worth understanding and was patient about the process. She said, I noticed in session 12. He looked at the window 3 times in under 10 minutes during the Jeth corridor section. I noted it, and I did not act, because the political cost of a false accusation against a council member with his tenure was significant. And now? Now the geometry is closed, and the cost has been paid differently. He nodded. He did not say, you should have moved sooner. He did not say, I'm sorry. He just nodded, the way a person nodded when they were receiving information and deciding what it meant, which was the same thing she did, and she recognized it the way you recognized your own habits in someone else. I move too fast, he said. That's my problem. Yours is the opposite. Probably between us, we'd get the timing right." She looked at him for a long moment. "That is a very direct thing to say. It's a very direct situation." He finished his own cup, set it down. 30 days left on the clock. Your legal team hasn't found a dissolution mechanism. No. Mine either. She had known that. She had her own means of knowing. "Are you still looking?" she asked. He held her gaze. "Are you?" She picked up her cup again, drank the last of it. She said, "The energy exchange clause. The one the Jeth Confederation kept adjourning the session to avoid. I would like your analytical read on it before the next session. I'll have it ready in the morning." He collected both cups. She had not asked him to. He simply did it, and set them on the tray near the door. He paused there, his hand on the edge of the door. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think the architect was right." She knew which architect he meant. "About building uncertain things," she said. "About the alternative," he said. He left. She sat for a long time in the quiet and the mineral salt smell of the filtered night air, and she did not open the dissolution file when she finally went to her desk. She opened her journal instead. She wrote, below the line about the calculus, "The cost of building uncertain things is that you cannot know in advance if they will hold. The cost of not building them is that you know exactly what you will have, which is nothing, and you will have had the chance to know it would be nothing and chosen it anyway." She closed the journal. She went to sleep, and this time it came faster. The intelligence review took 9 days. At the end of 9 days, Venroth's coordination with the Jeth trade delegation was confirmed through 6 separate channels, 2 financial records, and a communication log that he had, it appeared, believed was encrypted beyond the sovereignty's ability to access. He had been wrong about that. He had served 11 years on a defensive council and still underestimated what the sovereignty could do when it needed to. The High Council convened a closed session to review the findings. Naira Sel presented the full report herself. She named her source of analytical support without hesitation and watched the expressions of 7 senior council members shift through a range of reactions to the name Corporal Owen Garrett that she had anticipated and prepared responses to. The only one she had not anticipated was the High Arbiters. High Arbiter Sale Vaughn was the oldest member of the council, which meant she was also the most patient, the least reactive, and the most consistently underestimated by people who mistook stillness for absence of opinion. She had been present at the original compact negotiations. Naira Sel had always suspected, maneuvered the cultural bond clause into the agreement herself, for reasons that she had never explained and that no one had been courageous enough to ask her about directly. She looked at the report for a long time. Then she looked at Naira Sel. "The human," she said. "He accessed the archives corridor on his first visit." "He did." "Which text did he stop for?" Naira Sel had wondered, occasionally, if anyone on the High Council would ask that question. She had prepared an answer that was accurate but brief. She gave it, the Founder's Letter. The High Arbiter was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said. That was all. Naira Sel did not ask what it meant. She thought she knew. The Venroth matter was concluded within the Council. The Jeth Confederation, confronted with the intelligence finding through the appropriate diplomatic channels, withdrew the fleet demonstration within 48 hours and requested a new trade session. The energy exchange clause went back onto the table. The session did not adjourn. On the 40th day, a different problem arrived. It came in the form of a communication from Owen's commanding officer, Colonel Adrian Fisk. Colonel Fisk was a careful man. Politically, she had read his file with the same thoroughness she had applied to Owen's, and where Owen's file contained disciplinary citations and decorated field service, Fisk's contained commendations and careful language and the particular kind of career that grew in careful soil. He had sent Owen to Velserath because he had been told to send someone adaptable, and he had chosen Owen because adaptable was a word that covered a wide range of behaviors that were easier to manage from a distance. The communication informed Naira Sel, formally and through the appropriate diplomatic channels, that Earth Interstellar Command had been reconsidering its position on the Cultural Bond Clause. There were voices within the command, Fisk's communication said carefully, who felt that the clause placed an undue personal burden on a decorated soldier. There were discussions underway about alternative approaches to cultural integration that might fulfill the spirit of the compact without requiring a formal bond. The communication closed with a sentence that she read 3 times. The decision remained subject to the personal preferences of the parties involved, and any documentation of consent or non-consent from Corporal Garrett would be considered in the review. She set the communication down. She went to find Owen. He was in the practice yard. Her guards used it in the mornings, and they had, she had been informed, extended him an invitation to join them after the 2nd week, which was not standard protocol and which she had chosen not to comment on. He was working with a training staff, moving through a sequence she did not recognize, and her guards were watching with the kind of attentiveness that in her experience meant they were impressed and unwilling to show it. He saw her come in. He finished the sequence. She noted he did not stop mid-motion simply because she arrived, and she noted that she noticed this, and then he came to meet her. She handed him the printed communication without preface. He read it. His expression did not change, which she had learned meant he was managing it. "Fisk," he said. "Your CO." "Yes." He handed it back. "Did you receive this before or after I did?" "Before, by approximately 12 hours. He looked at her, "Which means you had 12 hours with it before coming to me." "Yes." "And you came to me." She held his gaze. "The communication specifies that your consent documentation is part of the review. It seemed relevant that you know it exists." He was quiet. In the practice yard, 2 of her guards had resumed their own training, and the rhythm of it was steady and distant, like background water. "Naira," he said. It was the first time he had used her name without the honorific. She did not correct him. "If you want out of this," he said, "I will document whatever you need me to document. I want to be clear about that. This was never something I'd hold you to if you didn't want it." She looked at the communication in her hand. She thought about the dissolution file she had opened every night for the first 3 weeks, and then with decreasing frequency, and then not at all. She thought about the High Arbiter's face when she said the Founder's letter. She thought about a woman 4,000 years ago, building uncertain foundations in the dark, and the line she had written in her journal, "The cost of not building them is that you know exactly what you will have." She said, "I received the communication 12 hours ago. I have not drafted a consent documentation." He looked at her steadily. "I came to tell you it existed," she said, "because you had a right to know, not because I had reached a decision that required your awareness of it as its first step." The distinction was precise. She made it carefully. He understood it. She could tell he understood it, from the way he was quiet with it. Not confused quiet, not waiting for more quiet, but the quiet of someone processing something that had weight. 42 days, he said. Yes. Plenty of time to do something stupid. The corner of her mouth moved. More than last time. "I have never," she said carefully, "done anything stupid in my life." "I know," he said. "I was talking about me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I need your analytical read on the Outer Rim territorial disputes. The council session is the day after tomorrow. I'll have it ready tonight." She turned to go. "Naira." His voice stopped her. She turned. He was still standing in the middle of the practice yard, the morning light on the scar at his jaw, his hands loose at his sides. "What did the High Arbiter say? In the closed session, when you named me as an analytical resource?" She had expected him not to ask that. She had thought about what she would say if he did. She said good. He looked at that for a moment, turned it over, decided not to push it. "Tonight," he said, "the territorial analysis." "Tonight," she agreed. She walked back through the yard, and she did not look over her shoulder, but she heard him resume the training sequence behind her, the steady rhythm of it, the practiced movement, the sound of someone doing a thing they had done so long it had become part of how they breathed. She went back to her study. She did not open the dissolution file. She had not opened it in 11 days. On the 58th day, 4 days before the ceremony, someone tried to stop it from happening. Not through diplomatic channels, not through Fisk's careful communications, or her counsel's procedural leverage, or the legal mechanisms that her team had spent weeks combing through and gradually, one by one, setting aside. Someone tried to stop it through a device placed in the east corridor of the residential wing, timed to the hour when both Owen and Nyra Sell typically moved between their respective quarters and the council chamber. The device was found by one of her guards 30 minutes before that hour. His name was Cale, and he was 22 years old and had been on her personal security detail for 8 months. He found it because he was meticulous, and because his training included exactly that kind of search, and because he had done his job completely. He got it to the containment team without incident. Then the containment team determined that the device had a secondary trigger, and in the process of isolating it, Cale took the secondary. He survived. He would carry the injury in his left hand for the rest of his life. Nyra Sell was told within 4 minutes. She was in her private study, and she came to the corridor immediately, and when she arrived, Owen was already there, which meant he had been closer, which meant he had heard the secondary and moved toward it rather than away from it, which she filed without comment under things she was still learning were true about him. He was not in the corridor to help. The containment team was professional and did not need him. He was in the corridor because the alternative was being somewhere else when something was happening, and she had come to understand that Owen Garrett had not learned to be anywhere else when something was happening. It was not bravery. It was a different thing, quieter than bravery. The specific orientation of someone who had decided a long time ago that being present for the difficult thing was not a choice but a location. She stood beside him while the team worked, and neither of them spoke. When the corridor was cleared and Cale had been taken to the medical wing and the lead containment officer had given her the initial assessment, Jeth pattern trigger components, professional construction, targeted timing, she stood in the empty hallway and felt the cold weight of it. 4 days. Someone had decided that 4 days was not an interval they could allow to complete. She looked at Owen. He was looking at the spot on the floor where the device had been. His expression was the one she had learned meant he was calculating something that did not feel like a calculation, something with an emotional component he was not going to name out loud. She said, "You moved toward it." I heard the containment team's secondary alert, and I was in the corridor. "You moved toward it," she said again, because the first time was a statement, and the second time was a question that looked like a statement. He looked at her. "It's where you were," he said. 3 words, set down without elaboration, without decoration, without the performance of meaning, just the plain geography of why he had moved in one direction instead of another. She was not a person who cried. She had not cried since she was 11 years old, when her mother had died in a transport accident, and she had cried for one afternoon and then decided that the world would not stop requiring her to function and that functioning was the best grief she could give. She did not cry now. But something shifted, moved through her chest in the way of water moving under ice, pressure without surface visibility. She felt it clearly. She let herself feel it clearly, which was the most she had allowed herself in a very long time. "Cale," she said. "He'll have his hand," Owen said. "He'll lose 2 fingers. He did his job right. That's what his job looks like when it's done right." She knew that. The knowing and the feeling of it were 2 separate things, and she held both. She turned to her security chief. "I want the Jeth embassy placed under full communication lockdown. I want a formal inquiry opened before morning. I want the High Council briefed at first light." "And the ceremony?" her security chief said. She was quiet for one breath. 4 days, she said. "The ceremony is in 4 days. Nothing about that changes." She felt Owen look at her. She did not return it immediately. She had a security chief to direct, and a protocol chain to engage, and a young guard in a medical wing whose family would need to be contacted before dawn. When she had finished, when the corridor was fully clear and the appropriate chains of response were moving, she turned to Owen. He was watching her with the kind of steadiness that she had initially read as absence of feeling, and had over 58 days come to understand was the opposite, feeling held so completely that it did not need to perform itself. 4 days, he said. Yes. You didn't hesitate. I don't hesitate when I know the answer, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, when did you know? She thought about the day in the practice yard, the 12 hours with Fisk's communication, the dissolution file she had not opened in 23 days, the journal entry about the cost of not building things. She said, 31st day. He looked at her. The Jeth fleet, she said. You were right faster than you were supposed to be. And you were sorry about being right faster than you were supposed to be. I had never met anyone who was sorry about being correct. He said quietly, I wasn't sorry about being correct. I was sorry about the cost. Yes, she said. I know. That is what I mean. The corridor was empty and still. The mineral salt smell of the filtered night air moved through it from somewhere distant. Cale was in the medical wing being tended to by people who were good at their work. The Jeth inquiry was moving. The High Council would be briefed at dawn. She had 4 days. She had more than 4 days. She had begun to understand, in the way you understood things that settled instead of arriving, that she had been building towards something she had spent the first 20 of those 62 days actively trying not to build, and that the building had happened anyway, the way foundations happened, not all at once, but incrementally, laid down in the ordinary moments when she was not looking for them. The founder's letter, the window habit, 2 cups of grain drink at midnight, the practice yard, and the sound of movement behind her that she had not needed to see. She said, Cale's family lives in the South District. They should hear before morning from someone who can tell them he did his job well. I will go. I'll come, Owen said. She did not tell him it was not necessary. It was not the kind of thing that was about necessity. They walked out of the corridor side by side, and when they reached the South District the family was asleep, and they woke the door, and a mother came to it with fear already in her face, and Nyracel told her what had happened, and that her son had done exactly what his training required, and had done it right, and the mother cried, and Owen stood slightly to the side in the way of someone who had delivered this kind of news before, and knew where to stand. On the way back, in the city that was still dark, in the streets that smelled of the filtration fields, and the bakeries that started their work before dawn, Owen said, I've told families before, not good news, both kinds. She said, how many? Enough that I know how to stand. She looked at the city, at the towers that had been standing for 4,000 years, at the sky that would turn amber-violet in a few hours when the sun came up over the Eastern Ocean. She said, 31st day, you asked me if I was still looking for a dissolution mechanism. Do you remember what you asked? Are you? He said. Yes. She did not look at him. I was not. I had not been for several days before that. I was not able to tell you clearly because I had not fully told myself. He did not say anything immediately. He walked beside her in the pre-dawn quiet, and the walking was enough, and the quiet was enough, and she had learned over 58 days that with Owen Garrett, the absence of words was not an absence of understanding. I moved toward it, he said, finally, because it's where you were. I know, she said. I would have moved toward it a long time ago, he said, if you'd been in any direction. She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. The city stretched around them, 4,000 years of it, built by people who did not know if it would hold. She said, I know that too. They stood in the dark for a moment, 2 people who had each spent 60 days trying to find a way out of something, and had instead, without planning it, found a way in, not dramatically, not with ceremony, but in the way of things that are true, gradually, and then completely. She said, we should go back. There is a great deal to do before the council briefing. Yes, he said. They walked back through the dark city, side by side, and when the sky began to move toward its first pale suggestion of amber, She thought about the founder's letter and the uncertain foundations and the cost of building things you could not yet know would hold. She thought, they hold. Not always, not easily, not without the days when the window is wrong and the calculus is wrong, and someone in your council has been coordinating against you for 11 years, and a young guard loses 2 fingers doing his job right in a corridor on the 58th day. But they hold. She knew this now in the way you knew things that had settled, not arrived, settled, the way the city had settled into the ground over 4,000 years, until the building and the earth were the same thing. The ceremony was in 4 days. She was not looking for a mechanism to stop it. She had not been looking for 23 days. She was building something uncertain, and she had decided, with her whole body, with her full attention, with the precision she applied to all things that mattered, that the alternative was not something she would choose. The sky turned amber. The city woke. They went back to work.